Isn't this a wonderful evening? Haven't the children made you proud? Our future looks good. Honorable Prime Minister, ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps, Venerable Archdeacon Glasgow, Reverend Glasgow, members of the Compton family, friends, and all who have come out to support this event and honor the contribution of the late John Compton, Sir John Compton, to this country as we mark the centenary of his birth. Welcome and thank you for your support and encouragement. One of the things I find that whenever I speak only about John Compton, and sometimes some of the things I say are misconstrued because people think that I am getting at somebody or the other, but I'm not. I'm only talking about John Compton, his life, his experiences, the good and the bad. And tonight, as is mentioned before, we also celebrate the 15th anniversary of the establishment of the Sir John Compton Memorial Foundation. And also, which nobody knows or remembers, this weekend is the anniversary of the day he first entered the Parliament of St. Lucia in October 1954. But above all, we are here to celebrate the centenary of his birth. And as we do so, we take the opportunity to do something meaningful and in keeping with Sir John's vision and his love for this country. As you saw the video earlier, we have chosen to bring an awareness to St. Lucians of the long overdue need for a national museum, for all to be involved in bringing this project to fruition so that we may with pride know our story of who we are, how we got to where we are, and of where we are going, and of those who along the way who helped shape the St. Lucia we know today from its earliest recorded history. Without this knowledge, we are missing a vital part of knowing ourselves. This endeavor has already begun with the government designating the former Golden Hope Hospital as a site for the museum. And I would like to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for seeing the possibility of turning a derelict former armament storage into a place of learning, of history, and of our story. I should also like to thank the government of France, and especially the former ambassador, Francis Le Etienne, who immediately could envision the dream, as have those working with him, Christelle Outremont, Fanny Raymond, Christiane Bourgeois, Camille Gigonneau, Aurélie Clemente Ruiz, and the team from Paris who are presently working on the feasibility study. They have all been so inspiring and encouraging to our committee here, which consists of all the stakeholders, the National Trust, the Folk Research Center, the Archaeological and Historical Society, the National Archives, and the Cultural Development Foundation. This is a huge undertaking that involves not only acquiring and putting together of the collections, the training of the staff required, and assembling a product that can be viable. It will take time and considerable effort, not to mention patience. But we have begun, and we look forward to working with all of you here and keeping you abreast as we progress. My husband always said, which was mentioned before, that of all that he did for St. Lucia, he wished to be remembered for bringing education to the people. When he came into office, there were 2 secondary schools. At his passing, there were 24, Not all of them were built during his tenure, but the majority were. It is because of his wish that the foundation in his memory is dedicated to assisting young St. Lucians in areas relating to education. To date, the foundation has raised over $1.25 million to assist St. Lucia's children. Among its endeavors has been to pay the CXE fees for some 2,000 children, has provided uniforms and books, paid for 2 students to study French at the Alliance Française each year, has paid for 2 students from Sir Arthur to study in Martinique, has provided funds for transport for children from the out districts to get to their choir practice, has provided funds for a school to be able to purchase musical instruments for a new school band, has assisted the School of Music to acquire a grand piano, and has assisted students from Sir Arthur and Monroe College with fees, has assisted a student with university fees in the US, and has assisted 2 teachers with university fees in the UK and at UWI. And it has also helped 3 schools in Dominica in their recovery following Hurricane Maria, on this occasion working with the Nassif Foundation. All of this is in keeping with Sir John's vision for St. Lucia, that every child should have an opportunity. And in the words of our Nobel laureate, Sir Arthur Lewis, that the answer to poverty is not money, but education. This year, while we honor and remember Sir John, who gave his entire adult life to the service of St. Lucia, as was mentioned before, the foundation intends to donate the funds raised at this event towards the proposed new National Museum, hopefully to assist in the training of the staff, which the museum will require. Before moving on, I'd like to mention some persons who these past years have always assisted the foundation in its endeavors. They are Archie Glasgow, Bernard Thibbles, and Dunstan Debole. They have been there from the beginning and have never failed. And I would also like tonight to remember the late Chris Rennick and the late Guy Ellis. And I would like to thank several persons who each year never fail to contribute and to help keep the foundation going. They are Anthony Bristol and Lyle Chase of Pinnacle St. Lucia, Randall and August Bain of Northwest, and Lucilec. And I'd also like to make special mention of Ronald Ramjatan of Baron Foods, who never fails me. And lastly, I'd like to thank my children, who have worked in so many ways to be of assistance. Fiona with her many promotions, and Nina, who has raised over $80,000 for the foundation. I'm happy she's here tonight. She's flown in just for the evening, has to leave tomorrow. Bless you, Nina, and thank you. Her last effort was to work with Tristan Epsilon, an amazing Trinidadian chef, who this year won this season's Top Chef, and he's from Trinidad. And Kamara Mick, another talented chef with Jamaican roots. You see, we always keep it Caribbean. And to my children, Sean, Janine, and Maya. Janine is not well tonight, that's why she's not here, and the others are overseas. But each of my children have been absolutely amazing. Without all these special persons, the task would be so much harder. Bless you all. Some 58 years ago, following school and college, I decided to remain in London for a time to gain some work experience. And then, My father was appointed as the first St. Lucian-born governor when we gained our statehood. For family reasons, I was the only one who could have been here to assist my father, although I always knew I would return home at some stage. This was the swinging 60s in London, a time when I could go to a Rolling Stones live concert and afterwards head to Heathrow Airport to welcome the Beatles back from their first trip to the US. A time when all the sound systems at Heathrow Airport were piping Beatles music. It was a heady time in London, and a time when it was not as an expensive place as it is today. Even so, I was happy to come and assist my father. That, of course, meant that I had to cross paths with one John Compton. You should know that John Compton was not my most favorite person at that time. I can't tell you when I first knew him. His name was always around when I was a child. But my father wrote, in those days, no cell phones. You waited every week for your letter. But my father wrote to say that John Compton was coming to London and that he was going to send something with him for my sister and I. I was designated to meet him at his hotel, which was near to my place of work. Those of you who knew John Compton know how abrupt he could be. And following my encounter, during which he offered to take something home for my father, I told my sister, "That man is so rude. I'm not going back there alone." Thankfully, when we arrived at the hotel at the range time, he wasn't there. And we left the package at the front desk, and I happily assigned my sister to make the contact with him to verify he had received it. Some months later, my father was in London, and I promised to accompany him to the airport when he was leaving. He advised me that John Compton was in London and that he would be meeting him at his hotel before leaving for the airport, and that I could meet him there. When I arrived, I couldn't find my father and was by now worrying that I had missed him when along came Kenneth Momplaisy, who informed me that my father was up in John Compton's room and proceeded to take me there. Well, my father had already left, and another chilly encounter. On the third occasion, my mother called to say, "John Compton is in London." And I replied, "I really don't care." So imagine when I came home to help my father, and he insisted that it was the polite thing to do to go and pay a courtesy call on the chief minister. I fought it for several days, but I had to give in eventually, and only on condition that my father would accompany me. You might say the rest is history, because it wasn't long before I got to know the other side of John Compton, the soft, the caring, and often emotional side of him. I don't think many people were happy with our relationship. In hindsight, I can see why. He was much older than I, had lived a very full life, and because of these pressures, our courtship was fraught with breaking up, tears, and making up the next day. It definitely wasn't love at first sight, but he became the great love of my life, my best friend, my teacher, my life's companion. We had 40 amazing years together, some good, some not so good, some trying, but altogether quite amazing. I had the opportunity to see him at times of triumph and those of great despair. And I had the unbelievable experience of seeing him transfer this country from the backwater it was to being the envy of the OECS. John Compton's great-grandfather was brought from Hampshire in the United Kingdom to Canaan to teach shipbuilding. And from him came the family's rich history of shipbuilding and seafaring. And he taught the craft from Anguilla in the north to Carriacou in the south. Many of you know Canaan. To those who don't, it is a beautiful little island, just about 5 square miles in size, in the St. Vincent Grenadines. John Compton's home, like all the homes in Canaan at the time, was nothing fancy, and life in the Grenadines was not always easy. Imagine, no rivers, no running water. In the dry season, once your tank was empty, there was only one pond, where everyone, including the animals, sometimes had to seek water. Often it meant only sea baths. He had to tend the family garden before going to school, and often walked to school with only a few plums in his pocket. And one day after school, he went fishing on the rocks with his cousin Mailings, and a wave took away his only pair of shoes. For days he searched, hoping the sea would wash his shoes ashore. It was all in vain, and he had to walk to school barefooted for some time until his mother could get him another pair of shoes. These experiences he rarely told of, and in later years following his retirement, when those who followed would often speak of growing up poor and suffering, he would sometimes comment that he couldn't understand why, and I quote, "they keep crying in their hands because we were all poor." These experiences, however, helped mold the man he would become. There are different ways in which he might have allowed them to affect his life, but he chose to remember always those left in those circumstances and to do his best to bring them to a better way of life. At the time he came to live permanently in St. Lucia, there was only one scholarship available every 2 years. After secondary school, many of the persons who helped build St. Lucia in the 50s, 60s, and 70s went to work in the oil refinery in Curacao to save money for their tertiary education. And many went on to study law in the UK, persons like Claudius Thomas and John Compton. John Compton was accepted at Cambridge University, but he arrived late and lost his place. He then went on to the University College of Wales, where he studied law and economics, and he would complete his studies at the London School of Economics. And he was called to the bar at the Gray's Inn in 1951. His time in the UK afforded him the opportunity to meet many students who would, like him, return home to make their mark. Persons like Ghazali bin Shafi from Malaysia and Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, who would remain his friends in later life. Lee Kuan Yew would write to me after his passing, and I quote, "Our common colonial history made for good friendships." His time in the UK, however, wasn't a bed of roses. In summer, he worked on farms, picking fruit to supplement his allowance. And there were times when he had just a shilling left in his pocket, and he had to decide whether to use it for transport to school or to put heater in his digs to keep warm or for something to eat. He would travel down the coast to court and witness the difficulties of life in those areas, and he determined to dedicate his efforts to making a change. He ran as an independent in 1954 for the Denry-Mico seat, now 4 constituencies. Some places were so remote that he had to ride a horse to get there. There was no schooling in many places, and he took his parliamentary salary to start a school in Olean, with 1 teacher at first and a second when he could afford it. He joined the Labour Party in 1956, but would leave in 1961. He never publicly gave his reason for leaving, as it would have caused embarrassment for some, and so he bore the criticism instead. In the late 50s, He was labeled a communist when he engineered strikes in the Dennery Valley aimed at bringing better working conditions to the workers. When he left the Labour Party in 1961, he and others formed the National Labour Movement, which would merge with the People's Progressive Party in 1964 to form the United Workers' Party. The UWP would win the elections of that year, and so began the first 15 years of John Compton as leader of the country. It was during this time that St. Lucia began to emerge in so many ways. So many institutions and organizations were formed to address the needs of the country. The Urban Development Corporation, which oversaw the building of affordable housing at Sanssouci, formerly a swamp, Entrepot, an independent city. Imagine those our houses on the highway opposite Lucilec at Sanssouci were sold for just $17,000. Once again, persons from Conway were given the first opportunity to own a lot, but were told not to acquire one. But look at the value of those properties today. Lots of land was sold on the Mon for 30 cents a square foot. Can you imagine the Sanssouci swamp not being filled and heavy trucks and countless vehicles having to pass through La Clery and then the Calvary? In 1970 came the National Provident Fund, now the National Insurance, and persons were encouraged to demonstrate against the NPF. Today, so many are thankful that he held his ground and that they now have a pension. It was the time of WINBAN, the Agriculturalist Association, St. Lucia Model Farms, all there to assist the farmers. It was the time of the Development Bank and the creation of the National Development Corporation to assist entrepreneurs to get financing to establish small businesses. When factory shells were built to help those who could not afford to have a place they could rent, so they could rent. It was a time when new schools like the Carmen Rennie Memorial and the beginning of the Sir Arthur Lewis College, the Teachers Training College, the Holborn Complex. It was a time when our first big-named hotel, the Holiday Inn, arrived at Redway Beach. What many of you don't know is that the chairman of Holiday Inn came to have a holiday here, and that his wife got badly bitten by sandflies. Many of you are old enough to remember that you could not sit outside at sunset at Rodney Bay, in Rodney Bay. And well, this gentleman said, if something was not done about the sandflies, Holiday Inn would pull out. In February of 1970, I traveled to Jamaica with Sir John to meet the Matalon family, to see the developments they were instrumental in, both in Kingston and the North Coast, to understand what could be possible for the Redway area. It was the beginning of what we know today as Rodney Bay Marina and Pigeon Island Causeway. Everything he did was criticized, from the Provident Fund to Sanssouci to Rodney Bay. He always said that had he listened to St. Lucians, he would have achieved nothing, and that he wished he'd listened to himself more. In Rodney Bay, he lived to feel vindicated when he witnessed his critics vying to purchase property and finally seeing the potential of Rodney Bay. John Compton worked with Leon Hess to get the present Lucilec facilities at Cul-de-sac established so that we could benefit from the improved services we enjoy today. John Compton personally walked every water source, every water course, north and south, to see where water supplies could be found in this island. He tried to keep water rates low because he didn't want people to go back to the river, where they at that time might contract typhoid or bilharzia. Because of him and his team, and with the kind assistance of the Government of Canada, we have the Sir John Compton Dam at Roseau. He also spent weekends working to lay water lines at Saltibus, Monrepo, and Patience, helping to build a small dam at Patience that has supplied water for the Monrepo area for years. Each year, John Compton wrote the country's budget himself. He would meet with the Secretary of Finance and all the permanent secretaries of the various ministries. Then he would meet the individual ministries, and then he would seclude himself for several days and go through all the government files to see where he might improve the country's income. Often he would tell me of the things he found in these files. And finally, he would sit and write the budget for that year. No one could go to Parliament with a question he couldn't answer when it came to the budget. And of course, of all these achievements was our independence. As Didicus alluded to, that he fought for and won, believing that it was our right to chart our own course. The 70s brought a massive change to our politics. It ushered in a violence, an entitlement without responsibility, and deeply divisive, hateful politics. It was a time of tear gas at the Prime Minister's residence, a time when we were building our home and a mason thought that hatred would twice be caught not putting steel in the walls, just out of spite. A time when our contractor walked out without a word on election day. It was a far cry from the time when our house at Maho burned down, and 2 weeks later my husband came home with a gift. And when I asked what it was, he asked me to read the note. That gift was from the leader of the opposition, Olio Jean-Baptiste, and it read, "To help you start again." All of this culminated in the election of 1979, when the Civil Service Union demanded a 60% salary increase. Now, I want to say to all of you businessmen here tonight, is there any metropolitan country where you have heard of such increases at once, or even in your business? Right? He was called arrogant when he said it couldn't be done. It was promised, and he lost the election. And St. Lucia was in turmoil for 2.5 years. And after losing that election, as is customary, the UWP, wishing to thank their supporters, planned a thank you meeting on the boulevard. To this day, I have never understood why certain members of the new government, having won the election convincingly, felt the need to create havoc and to have persons to bring buckets of excreta to throw on the participants of that meeting. That was one of the occasions when my husband was almost killed. There were about 3 occasions when he was almost killed. It was the late Clendon Mason, whose shirt he recognized, who saved his life, shouting to him to get out as persons tried to turn his vehicle over. That night became known as Plywood City, because they ransacked the city, and I can see some of you here tonight whose businesses suffered on that evening, but not many of you know the true cost of that evening. Today, we are happy to speak of the relationship St. Lucian athletes have with the Puma Sports Company. But not many of you know that in 1979, the Puma Shoe Company, the 3rd largest shoe company in the world, was planning to open a factory in Vieux-Fort. Just as the Milton Bradley Games Company, then so popular, planned to do the same. Leon Hess was considering upgrading the cul-de-sac facility to a full refinery, which would have meant increased revenue for St. Lucia. All of this was lost on the night of Plywood City. What might Vieux-Fort have been today? In my husband's despair, he would say that it was, and I quote, like filling a bucket with a teaspoon, and someone comes along and kicks it over, and you have to start again with a teaspoon. That was his experience when he returned to office 2.5 years later, when, just as he said, the country couldn't meet the 60% increase. And for 4 years, he would come home and say to me, I don't know how I'm going to do it this month. It was only in the 5th year that I saw his shoulders lifted, his smile returned, and his confidence restored. But not for long, because in the ensuing election, after all that hard work, the UWP won by a 1-seat majority. Heartbroken, he told me he would not continue, that he had worked so hard to restore things, and he contemplated on who could take over. He thought George Mallet, in whom he had great confidence, was his age, and someone younger should be considered. I suggested Romanus Lancico. It was a time when he could have chosen several ministers, but Romanus stood out. He was honest, hardworking. He worked to raise $1 million for Victoria Hospital, took his weekends to execute projects like building a bridge in the south, had given up a better paying job at Cable and Wireless to come and serve his country. He never abused his privileges as minister, even going as far to cut off his government phone at his home for a while because he felt his children were abusing its use. That was Romanus Lancico. My husband called Romanus, who came to our house, and when he asked him to take over, Romanus sat for a while and then quietly said, "Sir, I won't do it. I came into this thing because of you. I won't stay without you." I'm telling you these stories tonight because there'll never be another 100th birthday. And these are not things we've spoken of, but you need to know. Because people tend to look, when you're in public life, you see nice things on the TV and everybody thinks, oh boy, it's all hunky-dory. But it wasn't all hunky-dory, you know? And so you must know both sides of the story. I wonder which minister of either side of the political spectrum would do what Romanus did today. John Compton was fortunate to have persons like George Mallet and Romanus Lancico, who over all those years allowed him to get on with the business of government and never have to look over his shoulder to see if he was being knifed. My husband never liked living at the Prime Minister's residence, feeling it wasn't his own home, but always saying that it was what the government provided. He ended up, however, living there for 15 years. And during that time, despite his ridiculous salary, he met the salaries of the household staff, with just the exception of the gardener. He provided everything needed to maintain the residence and even paid the utilities for 12 years. When he finally chose not to return in 1982, he never claimed expenses from the government, saying that it was his choice. The government provided him with a house, but it is his choice not to live there. Throughout all of this, he was called a devil, a traitor, and a thief. But in the words of Gloria Menal, who worked with him in the Prime Minister's office for over 20 years, the boss never took a glass of water from the people of St. Lucia. High office never changed him. He remained true to himself. He liked to live simply, preferring to drive himself and preferring his pickup to any fancy car. And I'd like to just remember the late Andrew Richardson, Dr. Andrew Richardson, who most of you would know, who would tell me that when he came to live in St. Lucia, when he was offered a job in St. Lucia, and he came from Trinidad, he was driving along the waterfront, and he saw this beaten-up old pickup coming along the road. And wow, he turned his head because it was the Prime Minister. And he thought, this is a place to live. I came from sirens and outriders, but this is a place to live. He found time for our children, checking their homework, fixing their lunch kits on a morning, teaching each of them to drive when he could have asked our driver. He took the children every summer to the estate for a few days to give me a break, and found the time to take Nina and Fiona to see their horses at Cap before school on a morning. Together, we raised 5 amazing children who, despite the immense exposure in which we lived, are 5 children with their feet firmly on the ground, who have each gone out and made their way on their own without ever using their father's name, and who have each given back to their beloved St. Lucia. They have each tried to assist the foundation, as I mentioned before. Those who decided to stay here have suffered a little for being John Compton's child, but like their father, they have let it wash off. Before my husband left office, he would keep telling me that he had to leave because St. Lucians didn't want to hear his voice anymore. He was saddened. He had worked so hard for so many years, had sacrificed financially, working for a salary he joked was way below all the young men working at Cable and Wireless, that he must be in scale 26. He left office with a pension of $2,777 EC after serving in the Parliament of St. Lucia for 43 years, 30 of them as leader of the government. He had no choice but at the age of 71 to go back to work. But he had never allowed that to deter him, to bring him down, or make him bitter. After leaving office, he would be denied a parking space near his office, be threatened that he could have a diplomatic passport, but that should he ever dare to put his foot on a political platform again, it would be ripped from him. He never again sought a diplomatic passport and died as Prime Minister without one. You see, these things never meant anything to him. I've shared some of these stories, as I said, because people think when you hold high office and they see all the nice moments on TV, that this is all of your life. John Compton was a rare human being. He suffered greatly at the hands of his adversaries and their supporters. He never forgot, but he never held any of it, and in fact continued to assist many of them and their families as he did all St. Lucians. Vindictiveness was definitely not a trait of his, and because of his example, he was able to keep his government on an even keel. I shall always be thankful to those St. Lucians who showed him so much love in his last days, so that when he passed, he knew that he was loved. We laid his ashes to rest in the places he loved in St. Lucia and in Canouan, where among the places they rest is in the church in Canouan where he was baptized. There they rest in a wall behind the beautiful words of Derek Walcott, specially written for him by Derek. I married a man who gave his best and his all for this country, who my children and I were honored to walk with all those years. I doubt St. Lucia will ever again have someone who will give so selflessly and completely for 43 years, someone who bore no malice, someone, in the words of one of his ministers, whose love for St. Lucia was pure, and who has left his footprints all over this island for the benefit of all. Thank you all for coming to remember him.